Well, what's up, guys? I haven't made a video in probably about a week. Haven't had much to talk about, to be honest. But I just kind of came up with one last night. And I don't think up to this point I've ever talked about it. But I'll talk about the big three, at least in my opinion, from GM's Corvettes. Like especially just the whole torque tube lineup, basically C5 through the C7 generation. But one catch for this one, right? Which I know a lot of people don't think it's that cool because of what they are. The automatic variants. I know every time you see people look at Corvettes or any sort of sports car, but I'll go with Corvettes for this video. Every time they see one, they want to see a manual, right? C5 with a T56. The C6s with either a 56 or a 6060 on pretty much the LS3 and up variants. LS2 variants and early early C6s, all of them at least had a T56 when it came with the stick. Then obviously you've got the C7 with the 7 speeds, which that one's the oddball of the group. But for this one, I want to talk about just specifically the automatic variants, right? C5s had one transmission the whole time. All of them really had, well, no, that's a lie. C5s is the only one between the three that had one automatic transmission, right? The C5s had a 4L60 the whole time. With the only big improvement, if you were to ever look at a C5, and, you know, like I know the price difference is actually more expensive to get a manual than the automatic for a lot of these. So for the C5, the automatic C5 is probably the cheapest way into having a Corvette. Now, can you do like absurd amount of power? No, right? This is still a 4L60. And yes, they did strengthen it up to accommodate for the C5 and what that car can do. But even then, it's not like out of this world where you can just, you know, keep going over and over on what the stock 4L60 can actually handle. And it's not a lot. I mean, it helps that it came in a C5, and that being in a C5, it had, you know, the whole Corvette servo made for specifically, obviously, the Corvette. Shocker. So yes, the C5s had a Corvette servo, as it says it right in the name. Internals were after 2001 specifically, so from 2001 all the way to 04, those versions had some updates in terms of strength, right? Not a lot, but something, right? It was a little bit stronger to at least handle the torque that LS1 could bring it. That's all. Really just to bump it up a bit to at least help it out more. Yeah. I'm not gonna say like if you start doing all these big upgrades like doing a cam or a pro, no, don't do no pro charger, don't do none of that. I mean, you could, right? You could. I'm not gonna say you can't. I just would not advise. That's where I go, especially when it comes with that transmission. And then obviously the only big change after 01, or well, I would say it was a change every year, but not really. I don't think it would be noticeable for really almost anybody, right? Every year there was always a slight tweak or slight reconfiguration to the transmission, right? Whether it was to the transmission or anything for the TCM, whatever the case was, right? They would always do small updates for the transmission to kind of shift better, communicate better, whatever the case was. They would do like very minute upgrades that would not be super noticeable, but I'm sure would help the transmission out, right? So C5, LS1, Z06s of that was the only, did not come with any sort of automatic. If you were looking at a Z06, you're only with a T56. So say only the base models ever received a 4L60 or just an automatic version. So cheapest of the bunch, cheapest of the three to buy and possibly even maintain at that point, right? It's the most cheapest and simple of them all. It's got the LS1, which is probably between the C5, 6, and 7 is the cheapest engine to straight up maintain. All right, it's the smallest displacement. It's just a modern day 350 small block of the past. So, modern day-ish, right? Modern day-ish. Like, I know I say modern day and that's about 20 years ago now, but still use port injection and all that stuff, right? So I guess that's still fairly modern day. And then now we'll move on to C6. C6 had 2 transmissions. The very first year was a 4L65. 4L65, right? Supposed to be slightly stronger than what the 4L60 is. Big problem with those ones is usually the actual diff itself wasn't strong enough to handle what the LS2 would give it. So it's just kind of, yeah, it's kind of a tough one for that one. Not really much I can say. I would say just literally ignore the 2005. Straight up. That's is it cheapest? Yes. Not cheap to fix, right? Transmission might be okay, but your differential, you gotta get that changed ASAP. So I would say, like, if you want to look at an automatic version, look at the 6L80s, because that's the only other transmission that car ever had, right? From 06 all the way to 2013, 6L80 was the transmission it always received. And that's fine, right? I know everyone's going to have their own opinions on certain transmissions, but you got to understand that this is a different world when it comes to, I guess, the Corvettes. Just because GM really gives, they treat the Corvettes very differently, right? Because that's basically their baby right there. That's the one. That's the one that could, that's the goal for, I guess, that's what their hopes are for any person who loves to buy GM vehicles or Chevy vehicles. They would love you to have the goal in mind is to buy a Corvette. That is their car right there. For the Corvettes, for the C6s, 6L80, obviously much stronger than the 4L60. I'm saying that one's not even a question. For that one, I've seen people the GM rated it at like 440 or 450 on its like maximum torque capacity, and I've seen people, like, especially if you tune it correctly, keyword right there, correctly. If you do it correctly, they said, because you got to do a lot of torque management tuning on that transmission to make sure that unless you just upgrade it already, then okay. I'm gonna say if you just upgrade it and get a brand new transmission right away, sure, or like a built one. But if we're talking about like just stock transmission, because most people never pay attention to transmissions, that's just a fact, right? They just want to upgrade engine, more power, cool. there's another thing that keeps it going, boys. The transmission is an important piece. And obviously drive shaft, but, well, drive shaft, torque tube, same. But transmission's another important piece, right? These transmissions can only handle so much. So especially you putting stress and strain on them. For 6L80, I've seen people bump it up all the way to 600 plus foot-pounds of torque is where the real limitation is, and it's fine, right? The car can actually handle, or that transmission can actually handle 600 whatever foot-pounds of torque. So it is right there, up there, okay? If it's done correctly and keeping torque management in mind to kind of obviously still have some sort of logic to save the transmission, it can do it. You just gotta have quite an experienced tuner to do that. Right, or someone who understands how the 6L80 works. But transmissions on those ones, they're stout. They have their own. So that one was actually the first of the Corvettes to ever get paddle shifters, right? Say C5 never had that. C6 was the first. Now, I'm not gonna say it was out of this world. No, those paddle shifters were quite slow. Like, you would click it, you'd wait like 2 seconds, and then it would shift. So it's not that crazy, but you know, it was a cool attempt. You know, it's a cool attempt of having some sort of manual mode. And it's fine, right? The transmission's fine. Obviously, in terms of how much for any of these, I would say, yeah, depending on how much heat you can how much heat they can handle, that's really up to how it was set up, basically. Because most of the time, the stock radiators for these cars were good, but not like out of this world, right? I mean, because it's, you know, it's supposed to be a street car, so they're gonna do it on a budget. Still, again, pour injected specific on that car too, on both C5 and C6. But transmission, 6L80. If you get, the only ones that had a slight difference would have been the Grand Sport variants, right? Okay, the Grand Sport variants of the C6. Again, slight tweak. You know, it kind of shifts a little, literally like a hair quicker. But that's really all, okay? It's nice, I mean, and I like the Grand Sports. They look great, to be honest. They look really nice. I'd say one of my favorite C6s ever right there. I see people always looking for the Z06 and all that. I'm like, I like the Grand Sport. I just like how that one looks. I mean, it's all basically is a Z06, to be honest. So, Z06 C6. Got the wide body fenders and whatnot. But for that variant, yeah, 6L80, pure blown, just a wide body C6 compared to the base model. That's all it is. And then maybe a minor tweak to power output, and then like very minor on that one, and then obviously a minor tweak to its transmission logic. Then you get to the C7, right? And if you're gonna get a C6 and you have an automatic, just stick with the 6L80. That's all I can say. C7s had 2 transmissions. This is an interesting one. So for one single year, 2014, the C6s had a 6L, or C6, C7s had a 6L80. 1 year. Most people don't even know that. Most people who look at C7s and they see transmission options, or like have read anything about it, the only thing that they understand about the C7s, people are always seem to remember when it comes to their transmissions options is it had either a TR6070 or 8L90. It did not, for one single year, 2014 only, had a 6L80. 8L90s did not come out until 2015 for the C7. Right. Again, 6L80, same thing, fairly strong. Not obviously super duper quick in terms of like, you know, you want to feel the shifts is going off 1, 2, 3 all the way up and whatnot. It doesn't do that, right? It is a 6-speed automatic, but I will say that 6L80 is probably your best transmission option between the bunch. I'm not gonna lie. If it comes to the automatic variants, I will say the 6L80 is probably the best option, right? From a stock factory standpoint, from what they are and how they came from Chevy, that 6L80 is probably your best option between the three, because the 4060 obviously is fine, right? It's the cheapest of the bunch to do any sort of either maintenance or repairs. It's the smallest, it's a 4-speed, it's an old school 4-speed. There's not much to it. It's very small, very compact, but very simple, right? C6 6L80s and C7 6L80s, you know, a little bit more expensive, slightly more complex, but nothing too crazy still, right? Then you get to the final version of the C7s, right? The final automatic, 8L90, which that one's a transmission that is a very, very interesting topic. Obviously, class action lawsuit. If you do not already know, now you do. Class action lawsuit for just transmission concerns over and over again and not them fixing it. I mean, their fix was to literally do a transmission flush, at least on the C7, do a trans flush 3 times. 3. I'm like, you know how insane that is? I'm like, that's a lot, okay? So you gotta do 3 trans flushes, and that will fix your shutter issues that thing had, because that was the one really big one, is that transmission would shutter. But what do you call it, for that, I mean, when they work, right, if you don't have any sort of shuttering issues, which obviously I'm not going to say every single 8L90 has a shuttering issue, you just kind of have to hope that you don't have it, right? And you'll feel it. It's very noticeable. It's not something that like you can just ignore. A shutter will, like, if it shutters, you'll feel it like on your butt, like straight up, you'll feel it. And then obviously there's certain ways to mitigate any of these for all 3 transmissions, especially if you want to just kind of save their or prolong their life. Shift kits, those do exist, right? Especially for the 8L90, that will definitely help that transmission out tremendously. If you either you know how to do it, or if you know someone who does know how to do it, and you get a C7 with an automatic, if you just want to have at that point, just for peace of mind, yeah, I would say for sure a shift kit is definitely in your future right there, because that shift kits is definitely going to help. That'll make that transmission actually pretty much be what you want it to be, right? It's supposed to be, the 8L90 is supposed to be with the C7, that's supposed to be basically the pinnacle or slash basically final version of what GM's torque tube setup should be, right? And for whatever reason, it had some of the biggest flaws. Or some of the biggest flaws. It was the only one between the three that had any sort of class action lawsuit, like straight up, right? Because of its own transmission concerns that could never be fixed. It's just transmission issue over and over again. Like when they work, they're great, but when it just starts to, when you start feeling it, it's annoying because that's the most expensive transmission here, right? It's an 8-speed automatic. That's about as complex as it gets for people, right? Especially for the transmission world. So, but if you get a shift kit and you get the right tune or whatever the case is, I think that would definitely help that transmission out tremendously. That'll help any of these, but the 8L90 will definitely thrive the best out of all of them. For a C7, I would say just, you could really, literally every version of the C7 up to the ZR1 all has an 8L90 variant. So if you have that type of money, go ahead, right? Obviously, for me, I like the Grand Sports. I'm very much a Grand Sport fan. I like them because of like, you've got Z06 style configurations and cooling capacities, yada yada, and then you've got to get thrown in there is basically a slightly tuned base model engine. All right, so you get everything in that engine. Those base model, literally the base model engines obviously don't generate very much heat. They're just, look, you're running what? LS1, LS2, LS3, right? For those C7, you got the LT1, which is the only direct injection variant, right? The only thing with the C7s that you just have to watch for, obviously, is the fact that those C7s do have AFM if you have an automatic. That is all. That's the only big one, which most people don't like. Yeah, those C7s do have that. C5 and C6, never had it. So, but I would say if you want to go for pretty much best bang for buck, which I'm sure everyone already knows at this point, best bang for buck between the three. And if you want an automatic variant, I would still say stick with the C6. I think if you get an automatic or a manual, C6 is probably your best option. C7 manuals, pretty good still. I'll give them that because AFM concerns kind of pretty much go away on the manual variants of the C7s. So, C5 being the cheapest of the bunch because it had one engine only, right? Basically. So, but hey, let's see, if you want to do some deeper diving in terms of what automatics you want, and just, actually really look into what they are, go ahead. I'm just here to shoot the meshes as far as what I know whenever I've been looking at these cars, and I've been looking at these cars for quite some time. So, but all right though, I'm about to head to work. Y'all have a great day. I'm out.